All right, welcome back. We are WEBD6201 in the winter 2021 semester, and it is week 12, part 1 of our broadcast. And today what we're going to be doing is we're going to be talking about a little bit of authentication with Passport and Mongoose. And then what we're going to be doing is we're going to restructure our app so it is a little cleaner in terms of from a client server and a model view controller perspective. We want to try and adhere to that pattern. So where are we today? We're sitting at week 12. Again, it's way ahead of time in terms of where we should be. So that's kind of where we're at. And next week, where we're supposed to do authentication, we're actually doing it this week. One thing to note is that test number 4, welcome Calvin, test number 4 is actually due on this Sunday. So please make sure that if you haven't had a chance to already, to start that test. Again, it's we only have 4 tests in this course, and they're each worth 7.5%. And I think they're very straightforward. Again, it's due Sunday at midnight, so please, it's already been released from last week, have a chance to do that. Next week is the final week of class, and it's also we're also talking about authentication with JWT as our final lecture. Our lab 4 is due on the Friday of that week, so it's not due on the Sunday. As the Friday is the last day of class, so that please, or last day of semester actually, so please make sure you plan for submitting on Friday. Okay, so that's where it is. Let's take a look at where we are here. All right, so I'm just going to go over to, so last week we talked about intro to MongoDB. What was that? We did CRUD operations, so create, read, update, delete with Mongo. We were introduced to Mongoose, the npm package, as well as MongoDB Atlas, which I had you guys sign up for. So what are we doing this week? We're authenticating with Passport and Mongoose. We're restructuring our application to meet their client server structure, MVC structure, from a programming pattern perspective. Update TypeScript default exports. We're going to talk about that today. We're going to create an auth guard function to prevent unauthorized actions and migrate to MongoDB Atlas from our local servers. That's what we're doing all this week, starting today. Again, due on Saturday is in-class exercise 11 at midnight. Test 4 is due Sunday. Lab 4 is next week on Friday, just to remind everybody. All right, so let's think about what Passport is and what we're going to be doing with it. So really, when we think about one of the pieces that's missing from the things that we've been doing so far in this semester is authentication. We've been talking about, we've mocked up authentication through the entire time. That's what we've been doing. And now what we're actually doing is we're actually going to kind of implement that this week. Okay, so starting today. We're going to be using something called Passport, which is a Node.js module. All right, so again, remember Node.js, bare bones, and what we do is we add additional modules to it to extend its functionality. So installing Passport is as simple as installing any other npm package in our package.json file. And what we do is, again, we connect to Passport and we initialize it. We use the app.use directive. And when we use Passport initialize and Passport session, that's how we kind of make it work. We're going to be using different kinds of strategies to connect and authenticate. We can use, in our case, for this semester, we're only going to be using the local strategy, but there's also something called Oauth Authentication, which allows you to create a third-party trust relationship with you and another authority. For example, someone like GitHub, LinkedIn, and Microsoft, Google, those kind of things. So if you already have an account with one of those providers, what you have established is a relationship with them, a trust relationship. And if they trust you, and if my website, let's say, trusts them, then I trust you. That's how that third-party relationship works. And so OAuth authentication is a very popular method because if you already have, if you're already authenticating with Google or Microsoft or GitHub or LinkedIn, then the thought is, well, we might as well use the same authentication type. Again, that's a little bit more complex to set up. Not much, but a little bit more complex, and we're not going to be handling that this semester. But there's some great documentation online for using Passport and an OAuth strategy to connect and authenticate. So we're going to be using local strategy. Local strategy, of course, is username and password, and we're also going to include a passport local npm package, as well as passport local mongoose to help us connect and implement the local strategy for connecting, which is username and password, like I said before. There are some code snippets that I've included here to give you examples of what setting up and configuring passport looks like, but I'm going to show you this in our in-class exercise today. So I'm going to skip some of these. That's inside of your PowerPoint presentation. We're also, like I said, going to be configuring our local strategy, and local strategy allows us to serialize and deserialize users. We're going to see this. Serializing user and deserializing user information, what that does is it encrypts user data. And like any serialization and deserialization that we've talked about this semester, we pass user data to the database. It gets serialized and becomes kind of in binary format, and then it comes back out as something we can read as an example on our in our application. One thing that we're going to see is when we start creating an ID, username, and password. Password is something that's going to be something that's not part of our schema, actually. It's something that's going to be encrypted from the very beginning. So we're not going to have a clear text password ever. And if you think about it, right, anytime you connect to a, let's say you call support for any service, and let's say you forgot your password and you want to get a password reset, they can't sit there and say, well, here's your password. If you forgot it, they don't even know the password, because there's no clear text passwords pretty much anymore, ever. And the reason for that is because of security concerns, right? So it's always encrypted. There's some kind of salt and pepper, quote unquote, that is used to almost like a hash that's used to kind of create an encrypted password. And usually it's at least nowadays 256-bit encryption. All right, let's keep going with the next part. So again, we need to create a user model like we've done for our context model. So we're going to see that today with some additional adjustments. We're going to see that. And then we already have authentication views. So we've been using authentication views from the very beginning. We just have to modify them so that they work with Passport, with the stuff that we've been doing. Again, I've also included some snippets about what these would look like if you're going to create a brand new authentication view, and what that looks like from a messaging perspective. So our message area is something that we're going to kind of implement with EJS over the next day or so. Okay, so that's what's going to happen. Again, it talks about how to use authentication and routing and how that's going to look. And of course, what we're going to be doing starting today is separating or decoupling our router from our logic, which is going to be called our controller functionality. All right, so that's what we're going to be doing today. Again, just some example snippets. We're going to also be using something called Connect Flash. Connect Flash is a way of maintaining state between loads. So for example, let's say, I have an error, but I reload my page. If I press the submit button, whatever that is, then if I'm trying to pass a message back to my page so I can show it to the user, it's going to disappear. So what Connect Flash allows us to do is it allows us to maintain that message, maintain state between reloads, and allows us to display a positive or negative message depending on if the user has made an error. Okay, so that's kind of what we're going to do. And we're going to install that module as well. So lots of little installations you're going to see today along the way. And it talks about how to configure Connect Flash. We're going to use this, again, the app use directive, and call an anonymous Flash object that we're going to use. And we're going to attach Flash as a plugin to our application. All right. And it also shows here some snippets on how to connect, how to use the Connect Flash module. Two parts of using that we're going to see later on is we have to establish a Flash message. Usually the Flash message is something like, we usually create a associative array with it, or key value pairs. So the one part is the key, which is, let's say, for example, login message. And the second part is actually the message that we want to display, which is a text string or something like that that shows what the message is. So that is how we use Connect Flash. We'll talk about this in a bit. We talked about OAuth, and there's some examples here about how to implement the GitHub Oauth strategy with Passport. So this is kind of an example of how we would do that. Again, plenty of examples and tons of different OAuth examples online, to kind of see how it looks like to use GitHub online. All right, so instead of using something like local strategy, username, password, you wouldn't do that. You'd use GitHub. Okay, so this is kind of the short intro to Passport and Mongoose. Let's see if we can implement that locally. All right, so one thing I've given you guys is an in-class exercise 11 starter. And what we're going to be doing today is we're going to create another little link from here, which is going to be the in-class exercise final that you can use to compare your code with my code. So let's kind of load that up for a second and let's see where that takes us. It takes us here to in-class exercise 10B from last week, right? So that's where I started off with. And I've taken the liberty of downloading in-class exercise 10B and creating a new, or drag and dropping that into my Visual Studio Code application. So this is where it is right here. I've renamed it to week 12B, and now I need to have a new repo online to connect to. So let's do that now. Make a brand new repo, and we're just going to kind of take the same structure that we've used before in the past to make a brand new repo. So again, during Programmer, we're going to click New, and we're going to go there and type that in. But instead of ICE 10B, it's actually ICE 11B is what we're going to be doing. That's what it's going to be called. It's going to be a public repository again, and we're going to press Enter. So that is getting up a repository up and running. I'm going to grab the last 3 lines of code here like we normally do as we set this up, and I'm going to be using this shortly, right? So when I set up my repository locally, let's use our built-in Git or version control plugin, which is right here inside Visual Studio Code. So again, I've downloaded and installed my project on the desktop. Here, I'll bring it over so you can see it. So we have lots of little ones, right? We have all of these, and so there it is. And I've dragged and dropped this project over kind of into Visual Studio Code like normal. And then what we're going to do is once you drag and drop the project folder into Visual Studio Code, it launches the project as normal. And what I'm going to do here is use the built-in command. So let's do that. So we're going to click there. Notice that there is an initialized repository and also a publish to GitHub. So if I click initialize repository, which is what I want to do, it does a git init. That's what it does immediately. If your application has as an example, a gitignore file, then it'll take into account that gitignore file. Ours does not. And I'm going to click this little plus button here, which is stage all changes. That's like saying git add dot. All right, so I'm going to click this little button here. And once I've done that, I've clicked the button, git add dot, and then I'm going to put a commit message, which is initial commit. And I'm going to check this checkbox right here, and it's going to check this, and that is our first commit. Now, I want to establish a remote, and one thing is that it still doesn't really do a great job for me. So I'm just going to use command line for that part. So I'm just going to go back to this, grab the last 3 lines of code here, copy them, go back to Visual Studio Code and paste them, and then press enter. And that does the same thing that we've done every single time. So that is our repository. All right, let's continue. So this is great. And just going to bring up a reference that I worked on yesterday, right? So let's get that going. And I think one of the challenges that we always have when it comes to working on the stuff that we're doing is how do we restructure our application? When we want to try and adhere to the model view controller pattern, one of the challenges we have is restructuring our app to make it work as we would think that this works best. And when we first start off, we kind of start off with a very simple structure that's been given to us by Express Generator. And we over the course of a couple of weeks now, we've been modifying our structure so it's closer and closer to what we want. So today we're going to go further. And the first thing that we're going to do is restructure our application so that the folders are in the right places. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to make a brand new folder called server. So this is new. So there's our server folder. And what I want to do in here is I want to drag and drop all of our respective folders, views, routes, models, controllers, config. All of those folders should be in our server folder. But first, let's run our TypeScript. It's going to help us, do the repathing that we're going to need to do. So Control-Shift-B. It's going to run our TypeScript watch task. Okay, that's what it's going to do. Again, this is before I install any additional applications or packages in here. All right, so now the first thing I want to do is take a look at my app.ts, and you can see that I have the proper pathing. And watch what happens here when I drag and drop stuff around. So one thing I want to do is I want to take my app.ts right now and all the way to my app.js, so these three files, and drag them into my config, because really what we have here is an app configuration. So drag and drop them into there. And when we do that, it rejigs our routes. So take a look. It should rejig our routes, right? But notice that here, I have a couple of things here. We don't care about this. So we don't care about saving that. We don't care about saving we do care about saving the server.js. Notice server.js updated. It says /config app. That's what happened. So that it found our app now in the right place. So we'll save that. So server.ts is okay. App.ts is a little messed up though. So when we moved everything inside of our config, well, routes doesn't make any sense anymore. So we're going to go up one level to routes and inside of it. So we're going to say /routes index /config db. Well, the thing is, in this case, config db, that's actually incorrect. What we can do is we can just say /db, because it's in the same folder now. That's what we're getting our db config from. Awesome. The other thing we have to change is our views and our clients and our node modules. All those three things have to change as well. But I'm going to wait for a second as we rejig kind of where everything is, because these things are going to change again. So let's just save this iteration. And then what I want to do is, now that I have my app inside of my config folder, I want to grab my config folder and drag and drop it inside my server folder. So again, careful, drag it into my server folder. So move. I also want to grab my models inside my server folder. And I want to also grab my views. Views also are server views. Those are all going to change. Routes. Yeah, there we go. And finally, controllers. So those are all changed. So those are the things that I moved from, kind of the root folder, the root directory, which is the basic area, inside of server. And I'm doing this because now our little package looks a little bit cleaner. All we really need to expose is our server.ts. That's the only file we need to expose, right? So that's kind of on the outside. Well, what about our routing now on the inside? Is it going to kind of compute, if you will? Let's take a look at our app.ts and make sure that that works. So app.ts, did it do any additional routing? Well, /routes, that's still okay, because it goes to here. And that's /db is okay, but this is not okay, this stuff. All right, so we need to figure this out. So views is we're going to go up one into views. So it's going to be /views. Okay, so you can see that that is correct, right? So that's what we want, not views. So again, if I go .. let's just do this together. So .. and if I go views, that's what I want to click on. So there we go. Okay, so that's the first thing. Same thing with client. Client, if I just erase this for a second, and if I go .. and if I want to go to client, well, it's not there. You need to go one more level up, .. client. And that's where our client is going to be added into our path. Same thing with node modules. So node modules, if I go to, as an example, .. it doesn't exist. If I go one more up, another level up, you can see now we're into node modules. And I can include this as well. So this is kind of relative path to find node modules, clients, and views. And this is important kind of a rejigging of where everything comes from. Okay, so save that. And in our index.ts, we've also got some rejigging of this stuff. So in our index.js, which is our router, right? Now it looks like we have to go up one to models, inside models contact. That's good. Looks like that's okay. Our app.js we don't care about because it's going to be kind of generated for us. right? So, and server.ts we do care about. Let's save that. So slash server config app. This is all good. Now it's a good time to run our application the way it is to make sure that it's still running, but we need to have our MongoDB server running. So I'm going to press Command CMD. I'm going to run Mongo. So mongod is what you run. And then what this does is it kicks off our server and it listens on port 27017 like we've done before. I'm just going to take this off of the screen to put it over there. And now that we have that running, let's run a little Mongo terminal, right? You can see already we have some issues, right? Because it's telling us we have a problem, right? It's saying that inside of our index router, /routes index does not compute, all right, from our, it says that's inside of, and which module? Inside of a config app.ts. So that is an error. Let's fix that error before we continue, because it's telling us. That's what the great thing about Typescript. It says, hey, there's a problem, right? So when we're doing this, /routes index, right? So this is where it's looking. It says found one error. Let's see if we can actually fix this problem. So let's see if we can fix this index. So // right? And then we want to go to routes and we want to go to index. And that's the same thing we had before. And we're going to say save. Okay, so that import star, it says it's kind of having a problem with declarations. We're going to fix this in a second anyway. All right, so that's first. Let's see if it actually launches now. So I'm going to run in my command prompt. Let's see if I can connect to the Mongo server. So Mongo, see it does connect. And what I can do is I can do show DBS, right? So that's show databases. And we have our database, which is called WEBD6201. So that's the one we want. So if I do use WEBD6201, I can switch to that and I can clear the screen and I can say show collections. We should have only one collection, which is contacts right now. And later on, we're going to have another one called users, all right? Because we're going to have a users so we can log in and log out, okay? So that's what we have right now. So we know we're connected to our MongoDB, so we're good. And now let's run everything with nodemon. So I'm going to say nodemon. And then if everything goes well, we're connected to our Mongo server. It tells us we're connected. And let's run. This is just restructuring right now. And let's run our little server and see what it looks like on localhost. And if there's a problem, we're going to see it. So again, we can see that basic routing is okay. And we can even do our mock login. So again, we can mock this up, right? As we can log in, it takes us to this thing. Everything is as it should be from last week, okay? And that's including everything we've done so far with our reorganization. That's what we've done. We've restructured, reorganized our code to make it look like this. Let's put this up on GitHub. This is a great place to do that. So again, I'm going to use our built-in kind of GitHub plugin over here. And what we're going to say is we're going to stage all changes. So this is something we can do, stage all changes. And on the left, we can say restructured wow, application. So to client server. All right, so that's what we did. We're going to check this box. And then once we've done that, so that's like saying git add dot git commit -m and then a message. And then we can push. We can go to this little thing here and we can push. And then what that does, it'll push up everything to GitHub. And you can see that when we go up on, excuse me, we go up to our link. This is our final. I'm going to grab this link and use this link here as our final. So we're going to put this into in-class exercise, a new link here on DC Connect. So in-class exercise 11 final is what this is going to be called. And I'll do the same thing for the other class. So this is for section 2. And we'll do the same thing for section 6, which is the 2 sections that I have. So if I go here and if I go to content, and let's go on DC Connect and add that in there. So in class exercise, we'll add in the same thing as before. So new link and copy that in, right? And we'll say in class exercise 11 final. All right, so you guys have that link now. So that's the one that you can compare my code with your code to make sure that you guys are on track with what I'm doing. And you can see like kind of a beginning and then what's going to look like later. All right, again, we do that every time. One thing to note is that this is not right. This should be in class exercise 11B. So let's change. We can change it up online like we've done before. So I can go in here and just do a quick change. And that's okay. All right, and we're just going to say commit changes. We've changed the README file, but now we're one commit ahead online. So what we're going to do locally is we're going to pull. So I'm going to go back to VS Code here, and I'm going to go to here, and I'm going to pull. And what pull does is it pulls our changes. So when I look in my folder structure and I look at my README file, now I have everything up to date. I could have done it the other way. I just did it that way because I was already up there. All right, cool. So we've got all this stuff ready to go. And one thing we wanted to do, so again, let's follow the structure that I've talked about already, which is all these things. So we've already done this piece, right? And we've done client server, right? This part. I'm going to restructure to model view controller. But before we get there, I'm going to do this part, which is updating our TypeScript default exports. So far what we've done is with TypeScript, if we look at our, I'm going to go into our server, and I'm going to go into config app, right? What I do with app is just use a simple export, but there's actually another way we can do this that might make our life a little easier. So again, if I look at typescriptlang.org, right? And if I look at default export, so there's a module pattern we can use with TypeScript. And if you scroll down into this place where I'm looking for TypeScript modules, you can export, re-export stuff that you've already had, and you can export specific things. So I can export a thing, let's say, for example, zip code validator. I can give it a name from something that's a re-exporter. I can do that. I can export specific statements. So I can say, I want this class to export. I don't have to put my export next to it if I want to. I can also change the name if I want to do that as well. So something like main validator as opposed to zip code validator, this class as an example, right? We can do that too. And I can also use a, if I skip down, I can use something called default exports. And what default exports allows us to do is you can only be one, right? And what it does is we don't have to use, multiple export statements like we do. And it kind of takes the main module and makes it the default module that it exports. So one of the challenges we've had with our application right now is because we're using the regular export pattern, then when I go to my server.ts, you can see that we're saying, okay, import star as app-config, yay, that's great. But then I got to do something ugly like app-config.app. And we also got to do the same thing in our router. So if I go to my app.ts configuration file, you can see that when I import index router from the routes index, right, then when I use it further down, so this is when we use our router, we have to go index router.router. Wah, that's ugly. Who wants to see that? So there's a better way of doing this, and let's do that now. So we'll try it out. But in order for us to do this, it sometimes requires us to do two lines. So instead of saying export const app, then we can do is we can say, let's make this a const, and then we can say export default, and then we can say app. And that what that does is it takes app itself and has that as the default export. So it's an extra line, but actually what it does for us when it comes down to it. Now notice how server went red. Why? Because now app-config doesn't compute the way we've written it, app-config.app.set. Let's first of all get rid of star as app-config. We can do this now again, and we can just simply go back to the other way of doing it, like this, app.appconfig.set. That works now, because appconfig.set is actually part of app. So that's kind of way more convenient. Same thing with here. And now we don't have to do appconfig or app.app. We can just rename this back to what it was before. So we're going to do rename symbol back to app, right? And that's going to be more in line with what we had earlier. Save. So that's the first thing we're going to do. And that works now. Okay, next, we're going to do the same thing with our router. So we're going to go back into our routes and into my index.ts. And if you notice that we did the same thing with our router module. So I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to say something like const, right? And then over here, we're going to just say something like export default router. right? And what this is going to do is the same thing that we did for everything else, export default. And then what I have to do is in my config, that went red. Why? Because my app imports router. So I can, instead of doing import star as index router, we can just say something like index router, right? And then of course we still have an error down in here because there is no index router.router. Index router is the router because we've created a default export. So that is that. And that is some of the ways we can do our defaults. There's another place we can do that, and that is inside of our model. So in our model right now, we have our contact model. Again, we did the same thing with this export const model as a mongoose model. So we'll do the same thing. We'll say that, okay, we want const model is equal to this, and then we can say that export defaults model. And then again, we don't have to do model.model, that kind of stuff. That kind of stuff. And we don't have to make aliases anymore in our index route. So if I go to my index route, notice that we did this alias, which is const contact is equal to this. Yeah, we don't need that anymore. What we can do instead is we can say something like, well, we're going to import contact from this, and that's enough. That'll make sure that everything works as nice, and it looks much nicer and works better than what we did before. All right, so that is the way we're doing it. And let's now, after we've restructured and we've used TypeScript in the way it was meant to be used, let's see if that makes it a little better for us, or does it mess things up from a local host perspective. So again, going back here, I'm going to go back and log out. Okay, and notice that I still have these views, which means our router is working. I can still probably do a mock login. And you can see that, sure enough, if I click onto it, we're good to go. There we go. Editing, all that stuff still works, right? So that means that we're good to go. We've done everything that we need to do while we've done this. This is a great place to put it up on GitHub. I'm going to go here into our plugin, and I'm going to push all these changes up. So what we're going to say is, let's state our changes. Then in here, I'm going to say something like, used default exports to improve TypeScript usability. Okay, so that's what we did. We went a little bit over. That's okay. And then we're just going to push that up. Okay, so that's our update. Okay, so this is what we've done so far, and what it's done for us is set us up nicely to start using all of our new modules. Let's start installing all of our new modules that we want inside of our code. And we're going to use additional modules in our package.json file. So let's do that now. So control backtick is going to bring us up to our terminal. I'm going to add another terminal in there so I can install new modules. And just like we've done in the past, I'm going to do a yarn add and then the module name that I want. So I want to add in connect flash. Let's do it kind of in order. So there's connect flash. I want to use our express session. That's what we're going to use. We're also going to use passport local, and passport local mongoose. So those are the main ones we're going to use. Okay, so those are the new modules. It's connect flash, express session, passport local mongoose. Going to add it into our package.json file, so we can see that that's the file that's going to change. We should also change this up a little bit so it says the right stuff in a second. So let's do that first. So we're going to do that, and if we did everything correctly, it's going to add all that into our package manager. Right, so this is right here. You can see that we've added all these new packages. Since we're going, let's change this. So this should say ICE 11. That's one thing we didn't change. Again, we're still kind of rejigging everything to make sure that things are good. Okay, so that is all ready to go. Awesome. And then let's add in our dependencies, our dev dependencies, which can help us with some code hinting. So again, I'm going to do a yarn add at types, and we're going to say connect flash, right? We're going to say at types, and we're also going to use in express session and at types, and we're going to add in passport at types, passport local, at types, and then passport local mongoose. Okay, so that's all of them. And then we want to say --dev at the end of all those and press enter. And that, if we did everything right, then it's going to go out, grab all those things and install the dependencies. But we see that there's an error in our node modules and we have to correct this. It's not our error, it's the type error. We have a type error in passport local mongoose. This is something that hasn't been updated for a while. You can see that if you go into passport local mongoose, we can change this anytime we want. Right, so we can scroll down to where the error is, and there is an error that says query T, so type. This is kind of a template, or a generic is what it's called in Typescript lingo. So we're going to change this to any, and that should fix our error. We don't know what that is, so instead of trying to figure it out manually for ourselves, I'm just going to put it into there, and that's okay. Okay, so that's going to fix that problem, so it's not going to complain. Again, that's inside of passport local mongoose in the at types area. So it's just for type hinting anyway. It's not going to really affect our code. All right, so that's cool. So we've done that, and let's close that off. And we don't need this anymore. Package.json is pretty good. And we've got everything we need. Now it's time for us to start configuring our code. So let's kind of stop some of these things, the noise. Let's reduce some of this. And I'm going to start with my app.ts inside of my config folder. So far what we've done is we have third-party applications that we've installed. And what we want to do now is install additional information, right? Or additional folders or packages, if you will. So we're going to start off with modules for authentication. So we're going to say modules for authentication. These are the new modules we're going to add in. We're going to do an import session from express session. There we go. We're going to import these all at once, so that way we're going to get going. Import passport, of course, from passport. Import passport local from passport local. So we're going to do all those things. So that's kind of our kind of getting going. You know, these are the things, some of the modules we've included. I'm also going to kind of create authentication objects, right, that we need. And we have our, I want to create an alias for the local strategy we're going to use, which is username and password. So I'm going to say let local strategy. That's going to be equal to passport local, this one, dot strategy. So instead of me typing that in, passport local dot strategy over and over again, it's just going to be an alias that I can use, okay? And I'm also going to import user, but I don't have a user schema that I want to use. So let's fix that up right now. So what is that user schema going to look like? So in order for us to log in, we need a schema, just like we've done for in our models for our contacts. So here's our contact schema. And I'm just going to split screen here, and I want to create a new file, right? And we're going to call this the user schema, user.ts, right? And actually, I want this one over here. So user.ts on this side and this on this side. I still want to use, when it comes to creating a new schema for our user, as an example, one thing I'd like to do is kind of keep the same pattern that I've had here before. We're going to add additional patterns in here that you've never seen before. And we're talking about from a TypeScript perspective. But one thing we want to do is these two things are pretty much going to be the same. So these two imports we're going to use here. That's the first part, okay, of using users. We're going to use that. And then the next one we want is this passport local, right? So import passport local mongoose, excuse me, from passport local mongoose. So this is the one, the new one that we're going to use, okay? And open this up so you can see it both this way. One thing I'm also going to know is we're going to modify our regular schema in a second, and you're going to see how that looks. It's not going to be just a regular mongoose schema. It's going to be a passport local mongoose schema. But first we're going to say, let's do a const user schema. And we're going to make that equal to a new schema like we've done before. So again, open bracket, open curly brace, right? And at the bottom, what I also want to do is I want to indicate the collection. So we can say that here's our collection, right? Which is going to be the user's collection. That's going to be something that we're going to be using. Okay, so we're not, just like we did collection contacts, we're doing collection user. So in here, what does this look like? Well, definitely email address is going to be something we're going to use. So I'm going to put that in there as something I want to use as a string. I also want a username. So that's new. Username. I'm putting it lowercase for a reason. Username as a string. Email address as a string. I'm also going to have something called display name. Kind of have that in here last week as well. Display name as a string. And then I want to have it a little bit different for two additional properties. One of them is going to be called created, right? And there's going to be another one. Notice I can use curly braces with these as well. So I can give an extended property in here as well as updated. Those are the two extended properties. Updated. The two extended properties that I want to use. Okay, so created and updated. And created is going to have a type. We can indicate the type, which is data or date, sorry. And the default value, we can actually impose a default value, which is kind of date.now. All right, so that's kind of what I want to do. And then in our type, we're going to have the same thing. I'm just going to copy these two things. So created and updated is like when I create my new user, I'm going to have a two additional properties that aren't going to be really touched, but they're going to be like timestamps for when we whenever I create it, I want to have a record of when it got created, the user, and when the user profile got updated, if that ever happens. May not have a chance to do that in our semester. Okay, so let's continue now with the next piece. So the next piece we want is this model declaration thing. And this is where we go a little bit different. So first we want to say, hey, user schema, now that you've created an object called user schema, I want to add in a plugin. So the schema for Mongoose actually allows plugins. And one of them is you want to use this Passport Local Mongoose plugin. All right, so that's something that we can associate all the functionality from Passport Local Mongoose into our regular Mongoose schema. So normally we're just using a Mongoose schema, which connects to MongoDB, and we're adding Passport Local Mongoose as additional functionality. However, we need additional help here because if I do this, so if I say something like const model is equal to Mongoose model, and I say that the model name is going to be called user, which makes sense, and then I said this is user schema, right? Then if I was to do this before I even do my default exports, so if I do export default, and we'll call this model, because that's something similar to what we've done up here. If I hover over this, it tells me that this is a Mongoose model, and that does not compute for us, guys. We don't want a Mongoose model. We want, from a TypeScript perspective, we want a Passport Local Mongoose model, right? That's what we want. A Passport Local schema is what we want. And what we can do is we can get that from Mongoose. So how we can do that is we can add additional imports. So I can say import Mongoose from Mongoose, but we can also say import Mongoose and then comma. I also want something called, and if I press Control Space, I have a selection of additional things, methods, classes, whatever that I want to access. I want to call this something, there's one that's called Passport Local Schema that I want to select. It's an interface that allows me to kind of cast our model as a Passport Local schema, not a regular schema, not a user schema. So I can say that our user schema, which is just a regular Mongoose schema, I want to cast it as a Passport Local schema. So to do that, I can just use the as keyword, as Passport Local schema. And when I do that, it lights up. You can see that lit up there. If I scroll to the left now, and if I hover over model, it is a Mongoose Passport Local model. And this is good because this gives me additional code hinting for other methods that would be hidden otherwise if we just made it a regular model. Because that's what we need to do there. I'm just going to pull this over so you can see it there. That's the complete user model. So very similar to the contact model, but with additional information. And we're going to modify this later. Notice that there's no password, right? So our user schema doesn't have a password. Why? Can't access password. I can't write or do CRUD operations with a password. It doesn't work like that. What we're going to do instead is we're going to, if we ever do an update, we're going to rewrite our password, re-encrypt our password. We're not going to ever read it in, only when we're authenticating. Okay, so that is this piece, and we'll go back to this. So that now that we've done our user, model, let's put that up on GitHub, because we've got a bunch of changes here that we've also added in. So I'm going to go at the top here, and I'm going to say kind of add these in. I'm going to say added user model. So we're going to click that, and then we're going to push this up to GitHub. Let's continue with our configuration. So again, going back out. Again, these are one-time costs that I'm showing you here. So I'm going to go to app.ts again, and inside my app.ts now, I can continue with what I was doing before, which is importing our user model. Okay, that's kind of where we were, where we left off. So I'm going to say that, okay, import user from, right? And then it's /models/user. And just like before, now we have access to the user model. And notice it's a passport local model, which is pretty cool. Okay, so that's our authentication objects that we're adding in. Let's continue. The next one is we want to have a module for authentication messaging that we're going to add in, which is Connect Flash, right? And it's also for error management. So that's what we're using it for. So we're going to say import Flash from, and then Connect Flash. Okay, so that's what that is. That's our import for that. I want to start configuring our app. So this is our app configuration, import router. We did that part, and we exported it. I also want to do, here's our DB configuration. Notice that this is interesting, import star as DB config. Why? Well, there's a couple of things we can't do. We can't use the export default because we have more than one object that we're doing. If we did it this way, then I could use a export.default, and then that kind of that object would have, it's another way of doing it. You can have an object. One thing to note is path is okay, but the proper term for this is URI, Universal Resource kind of indicator here that we have. And our secret we're going to keep there. Right? So URI is what we've changed, so save. And when we do that, this is incorrect. It should say URI here instead. Again, I could have rejigged it by refactoring. But that's what it should say. So dbconfig.uri, we're also going to point to, later on this week, so tomorrow, I'm going to point my URI to MongoDB Atlas, not our local DB, which is where it's pointing right now. Okay. So that's our just updated DB configuration. I just changed the name to URI. Okay. Not much difference there. Let's continue. So we did our view engine setup and all that kind of stuff, and we added stuff to the path, the client and node module stuff. We went into our routing, but before we get into our routing, I want to, and just after our static additions to our path, let's just add some spaces in here and add additional configuration. One is we want to set up a session. The express session is what we want, express session, because we're going to use session, our session storage for that. So we're going to say app.use, and we're going to say session, right? And actually session should be lowercase because that's what we called it earlier, express session, right? And then what we want to do is we want to open that up, and it's going to have kind of this structure. And the first thing that I want in my express session is the session secret. So the session secret is going to be dbconfig.secret. So you can see that I finally use that secret, which is like just some key that we can use kind of to, again, it's to access or hash our session information. All right, and that's a key. We can make any key we want. Our secret is some secret, but you can make it whatever. We're also going to use a save uninitialized value of false, as well as a resave as false. We've been very explicit here to do that. You might get an error that says resave is not really in your dictionary. You can add that in your local dictionary so you don't have a warning here in Visual Studio Code. Okay, so we can right click and add to dictionary, to user dictionary. All right, so that's what I did. So this is your Express session configuration. Let's actually add connect Flash. So we're going to initialize Flash now, initialize Flash. And the way to do that is we're going to say app.use. We've seen this in the PowerPoint Flash, right? Which does this part. That's initializing Flash. And we want to use, we want to initialize Passport now. If I can spell initialize properly. So we want to initialize Passports. We're going to say app.use, and then we're going to say passport.initialize. So that's kind of simple. And we're also going to app.use passport.session, because that's going to kind of kick off session with cookies, cookie-based authentication. Next week, if we have time, we'll update to JWT authentication with JSON Web Tokens. All right, let's continue. And or JavaScript web tokens is what it's called. Implement an Auth Strategy is what we want here. And what Auth Strategy, we're going to use our local strategy. So we're going to say passport.use. And we're going to say now we're going to access the user object. So user dot. And what we want is we want to create our strategy. Now, this is only made possible, right, because of what we did with our user model. Remember that we turned it into a Passport local model. If we didn't do that, then create strategy, which is a Passport local model method, it's a convenience method, would not be possible. You wouldn't even see this come up. It would be an error that came up here. And that's why we did that change to our user model, right? So if I go to user.ts, we made this change here. We cast it as this. If I was to take this away just to show you, see the change. So if I kind of said save here, now automatically we get an error that's down here that says, I don't know what you're talking about. There is no create strategy on a model that's a Mongoose model. Okay, so that's why we did that here. All right, so undo. If I save that, you see the error goes away. We see that that is back to normal. So we're just using an interface. Would it have worked without it? Yes, it would, because at the end of the day, when we compile or transpile from TypeScript to JavaScript, even if we don't have type definition for a certain thing, it'll still work. Okay, next. We want to serialize and deserialize our user data, right? So the way to do that, of course, is passport.serialize, serialize user. We're going to say the user also has its own serialization. So serialize user. That's what we're going to do there. And we're going to say that passport.deserialize user is user.deserialize user. And the reason why it looks repetitive is what I'm doing is I've got a schema, user schema, and because the user schema has been casted as a Passport local model, then it has its own serialize and deserialize user method that kind of encapsulates stuff and makes it easy for us to use. And that's why we did it this way. Instead of using hash, using salt and pepper and all that kind of stuff to hash, Passport local Mongoose actually adds additional convenience functions like these to help us out. So it just makes it a lot easier for us to use. And finally, we want to do our router config. So this is our route config. All right, so we only have one route, which is our main route or index. We're going to have others at the end of this week. One of them we're going to have is /contact list. So contact list is going to be a sub-route or a sub-region of our or subsection of our pages, right? Because it's going to have its own little routes, right? So that's something that's going to be a little different. All right, so now we've got all this. This is all the configuration we had to make. All these changes to configure authentication. Guys, this is all we ever have to do. We're not going to add anything additional this week. This is all the config. Again, this is kind of an upfront cost to configuring our authentication with using Passport, Passport Local, and Passport Local Mongoose and Flash. Whew, right? Lots of stuff. All right, so let's put this up on GitHub because we finished our configuration. So we're going to go to here and notice these are the changes. So I'm going to go into stage all changes, cancel stage all changes with the plus, and say something like completed, kind of auth configuration in app.ts. That's what we did. So we're going to kind of click that, and then we're going to push. So that's going to be those changes there. Again, one thing to note when we change anything is let's take a look and see, do we still have regular functionality here? And we do. We always want to check these. So if we break something, then we'll see what we're broken. Again, this is all still mocking up authentication. It's not really authenticating anything, but we're using some basic data. This data here, if you realize what's happening, is no longer coming from our if we go into inspect, and if I go to application and local storage, there is nothing in local storage. It's coming from our database, a local database. However, this part still exists, which is our user data that's inside of session storage. We're going to kill this this week. We're not going to have that anymore. Everything is going to be on the database, including the user information. All right, that's great. So that is what we have so far. We're doing well, and let's continue. So what's next? Now that we've done that, now it's time for us to restructure our routing information. So far what we've done in the past, this is just in prep for doing login, logout, and register, okay? To prep for this, we're doing a lot of restructuring today, but this is good. We're gonna move our logic. So let's just kill these things for a second, just to make it cleaner so we can work with one file at a time. So here's our router. Right now, our router uses both the route, this is this part, as well as the logic, which is this part. The logic, so what our directive is, after we've gone to the route, this is our controller. Remember, model view controller, we decouple our logic from our routing. All right, routing is just a process or a, and by the way, we don't have to include routing. But we do. That's part of our system, if you will. We have a routing system that's included in Express. But what we want to do is maintain this model view controller pattern, and all the controllers, all the logic should be kept inside of our controllers folder. So to support this, I'm going to make a new index controller. Index, every controller is going to match the router name. So, and the way we read our files, by the way, is like this: index router, index controller, right? App config, DB config, right? We read from the inside out is how we do it, right? So if I look at the view, it's our index view. That's the kind of way we look at it, right? So that's why it's structured the way it is. It's very carefully structured in this kind of a vertical way. It's not a horizontal structure. We can actually make it even more complex than this. I'm making it a kind of a first level layer of complexity, not really that much, not as deep as we could go. All right, so let's add in then a new controller file. So we're going to say new file, and we're going to call this index.ts. By the way, some people get confused with the same file name. We're like, wait, index, we're using index again. Why do we keep using the same file name? I've been asked that question lots of times. It's a structure. It's really a convention, if you will, right? What would you call it if it was in here? Would you call it index controller inside the controllers folder? You could. Pretty wordy. And that's what sometimes people do. They go index.controller.ts. That's what they would call it, right? So it's descriptive. So you can differentiate between my index, which is in my controller, and my index, which is in my router, right? My routes folder. And maybe there's other index files that we're going to see later on as well. But this is fine. So this is my controller's file. So what we want in my controller is we want to think about all the, notice I took away the git keep file as well. What one of my controller is just the, start thinking about routing, okay? Start thinking about routing. And that's the first thing I want up here. So inside here, I'm going to do an import express. And I'm also going to import something else. I'm going to import a few more features of Express. We're going to import request. I'm going to import response, and I'm going to import next function. So these three little imports, what they do is they put names to the functions that I can use outside of Express to cast, or as an interface, my request, response, and next objects inside each of my functions. So from Express. Okay, so this is cool. And then we can say we want to do the same thing with our router, right? So we're going to say const router is equal to an express.router, right? So that's something we instantiate our router that's in here. We may not use it, we'll see. We're also going to import Mongoose, right? Because we're going to kind of connect with Mongoose again to the MongoDB database, as well as Passport. So these are just our imports we need just to support our controller. Again, this is the controller we're making right now. Again, look at the server controllers index. So we say index controller in our server file. Again, some people, what they do is they actually name this file index, or .controller.server.ts. So you know exactly where this file belongs, right? All right, so it's a kind of in a reverse name order. So this is the first part. The next part is I want to create the user model instance. That's what I want to do. So again, we're going to import that, import user from, and we're going to say /models/user. So we're going to get that user model. Why? Because we're going to try and log in later, and we need the user information to log in, right? And we also want to separate our stuff in terms of display functions, display page functions we're going to have in here, as well as we're going to have process page functions. So example, if I want to display the home page, I'm going to put it in this section. If I'm going to process the contact page, I'm going to put it over here, right? Just to separate those two things up a little bit. Now, warning, what we could do, I'm not going to do that here, but what we could do is we could create a new controller class. We can call this controller the index controller. And the index controller class can have a constructor, and it can have a bunch of methods inside of it that are each of these functions. We're not going to do that here right now. Okay, right now we're just going to make them independent functions that we're going to export individually, right? Otherwise, what we can do is we can do an export default, and whatever that thing would be called, index controller, as an example. But we're not going to do that here. So let's continue with what we're doing. So again, let's break it out. We're going to say export function. This is what it would look like, right? Let's make the first one, which is called display homepage. So this display homepage. And what we're going to have in our display homepage is a request, response, and next function. That's what it's going to look like. That returns void. Okay. And it's going to say, wait, what are these things? Well, we know what they are. They're these things, right? So we're going to put that in place. We're going to use the same pattern everywhere. So request. Notice how that lit up. Response. That lit up. And next. That lights up. Okay, so that is what it looks like. Okay. So pretty straightforward in terms of what the function would look like. And what I want to do here is now let's split screen and go back to our routes. Here's our route, right? That's what our normal routes would look like. I want to split screen here. And on the right, it's going to be our controller. So our controller is going to be on the right. And our route is going to be on the left. So I want to replace the logic that's in the route with my function that I've written inside of the controller, right? Well, in order for me to do that first, I need to import my controller in here, right? So a nice thing to do, again from I'm thinking about it from a commenting perspective, is what we want to do is we want to create an index controller instance. So we're going to say that create an index controller instance. Okay, and what that looks like is import, and then we're going to say, instead of me importing everything, let's suppose I can import individual functions this time. So again, this is a little different. We're going to say, what if I want to import our display homepage function? So display homepage, right? And I want to import just that one function individually from, and I go again, it's ... right, controllers / index. Okay, so that's what it looks like. So what this does, notice that this lit up when I did that. Display homepage is the controller that I want to use. This is dull right now. And I want to replace this functionality right here, this whole callback function right here, with my display homepage. How do I do that? I just use display homepage like this. And now that lights up. It goes from a dimmer color to a brighter color. And my friends, look how beautiful that is. That is so much nicer than using all that other stuff, right? But I need this part. Let's not get rid of this part. That part is going to be in here because we actually have to have the actual functionality. That's the functionality. It's still going to res render, right? It's still going to do something. Speaking of which, we can always use the same function again for our homepage. So again, we can kind of get rid of all this part and just go display homepage. So that is for our home / home route, as well as our / route, our default route. Those two things are using the same function, the same controller. Okay. Cool. I love it. This is good, looking at good. I want to do the same thing for about and services and projects and a bunch. Let's start coding those things in here. So I'm going to just grab this and copy paste a bunch of times and replace the code inside the actual stuff in here with additional functionality. You're going to say, wait, we haven't saved anything, Tom. Not yet. But what we've done is we've made it very clear. Once we see this, we have a very clear way of looking at all the routes that are inbound. Remember, every time we do a router.get, what we're doing is we're creating an event that's listening for a specific route that's incoming to our server from the client. Okay? Let's do the next part. So this is some display function. We're going to display the about page. We'll just rename them. Well, we're not going to change this yet. I'll do that later. Display about, display services, right? Display projects. We've done something very similar before, didn't we? Inside of our client side. Display contact. Okay. Display login. We don't have a register page, but we're going to add it in. Display register. So login, register, and then we have some temporary areas here that we're going to remap. We're going to start thinking about what the process functions do, right? Again, we have to kind of change these in a second. The process functions that are in here, one of them is process logout. That's what this is. So process login, right? That's one of the functions. We're going to process a bunch of stuff that's in here. So these are our processing pages. So what we're going to do is just make it a little bit different. So I'm just going to grab one of these. Let's grab the login first. So this is register. Just use login for an example and use that as a process function. And it's going to say, instead of display login, we're going to say process login page, just to make a difference. So process login page. Process register page. Right? What are the processing here? Process logout page. We'll put that underneath the login page. So process login, process logout, process register, and process contact. Right, we didn't have that. Process contact page. Okay, so these are all the pages that are going to be process pages. Again, they're just stubs right now because they're using the exact same code everywhere. And now we're going to go back and replace all this code with real code. Again, it might look repetitive, but actually it's going to help us later. And why? Because then we can have just routing in here. Here we just have logic. And if we have a page that's using a piece of logic, I can reuse this logic. Here I can't. Right? This is only for this route. Whereas here I can import this controller in different places, and I can use this logic other places as well, as long as I have access to the user model, which I will. All right, so that's why we can make it a class if we really wanted to, as opposed to making it a flat file like this, but we're not going to do that right now. All right, next, now that we've got this, let's start replacing some of the details here. So about, that's going to be changed just slightly, but I'm just going to copy paste so we just get everything the right way. That's about. Services, again, I mean, I'm only changing a couple words here, but it doesn't matter. It's always best to keep the same structure that we had before we modify stuff. Projects, again, this is just setting things up for the changes we need to kind of use for next week as well. Contact, right? Login, and we also have a register page. Now notice that there isn't a register function here, but there is a register page down here. And I put it in here for getting, but we're going to need something else later. So register page here, and we're going to put the display register here. So again, it's more organized this way, I think, when we do it this way. Okay, so there's display register. And display logout, there isn't a logout, it's process logout. And for our process pages, I'm going to make them render defaults right now. They're going to just render the home page over and over again. All our process pages aren't going to do any processing right now. Okay, now we're not done. Now what we have to do is just rejig these so they look like this. So there's a couple ways to do this quickly. One is, let's save this file to make sure that these changes are saved, and now they can be imported here. And then what we want to do is we want to rejig these things. So when I go to the about route, I want to use the display about page. Now notice it says it's a server controllers index. If I click onto this, right, as an example, it doesn't really compute, right, because I have to import it. I could go and import it by hand, or I can use a little light bulb here and just say, hey, add the about page to an existing import. Boom, it adds it in. Let's do the same thing. So I don't have to actually type anything. Just the name of the thing I'm importing. So display services page. So that computes for me. And again, I'm just going to use the little light bulb. Same to the next thing. So display projects page, right? And I'm just going to click on this thing, and I'm going to go here and add that in. Contact page, right? And finally, the login page. We also want to move our register page up there. So I'm going to grab all this and move that up here. All right, so that is kind of a new position for this, and we can replace this part with that part, display register page. There we go. Pretty cool. And then all we have left is process pages, right? The process pages use a post request, right? Except for the process logout page. So instead of a get login, we're going to process login, right? So we have a process login, process logout, a process register page, and so on. Let's make these do what they're supposed to do. So again, I'm just going to kind of do one of these. So it's going to be called process login page. I don't have the logic for this yet. It's just going to do the same thing we've done before. And we're going to process the logout page. Okay. This is all in prep for what we're going to do later. Contact list we're not touching. We're going to do this later on with another route. So we're going to leave those alone right now. We also need to process the register page. We don't have that. So we're going to do a router.post. We'll put it under here. And we'll say router.post/register. When I register, because I'm going to actually create registration for you, we're going to process the register page. Okay. And again, I need to add that in as an import. So what did those little light bulbs do? Well, then it did this long import statement. And that's totally cool. That's okay. It just created a really long import statement of all the files I want. Is there an easier way to do this instead of doing it this way? Okay, well, let's try it a different way. So I'm going to come back to this in a second. What if I didn't do this and I did it a different way? I said import, right? And I did like we've done before. You know, I called it like import star as an example, you know, from, and then the route that I want to do, which is something like / the controllers /index. Well, if I did that, the problem is I need a name. I can't just say star. It needs to have some kind of name. So if I call this, let's say as an example, we're doing exports for each of these exports, right? So if I call this the index controller, I'm just putting this out there to you, right? So star as index controller. Well, now these don't compute. What I got to do instead is do something like ugly, like this: index controller dot, and that would be working, right? Index controller is the namespace, if you will, and then I can do it this way. But if we do it this way up here, then we can avoid doing index controller dot, right, altogether, and we can just do the other way around. It's a little bit more wordy, right? But it's actually quite explicit about how it works. Or this, so this works a little nicer in my opinion. Okay, and by the way, we can also do import star as whatever, right? We can do import star as index controller. We can do this too. And then put a comma. That also works, right? But the problem with doing this way is that now these things, it gets confused when you do this kind of stuff, right? So if I said something like import index controller and then did this, then it would say, well, I don't know what that is. It's not really an export. I'm not doing a default export function. If I had a class, that would work great, but I don't have a class, and so this can't work this way. The other way I could do this is if I didn't want to make a class, but I wanted to make an object, is I could create an outer object, and then I could add each of these functions, display home, display about, display services, with comma separated values to make them as all part of one big object. And then I could export that default object, and then this would be simplified in some ways. Again, 6 of one, half dozen of the other. I think this is just easier to see. I'm importing all these functions from where? I'm importing them from the controller's index, right? Index controller. That's what I'm doing. So pretty straightforward. All right, so that is this piece. And now let's test it. So one thing is making it like this, and the other one is testing it. Okay, so how do I test this to make sure? Well, we can just use our regular pages. So again, if I click on any one of the pages, I should see all the pages pop up, which I am, right? And we should still even now have our default mockup kind of login methodology. Let's try that again. I typed in the wrong thing. Right? I can still do this. But now what happens is when I process my page, it goes back to this because I can't see my contact list anymore. But one thing it did do, still does everything else. If I look inside my inspect area and go to my application, I still have a user, which means I still can get to manually, I can still get to my contact list. I can still do this, right? But I'm not going to contact list, right, when I'm processing it. So to mock this up for now, before we get into this, when I log in, right, I can take myself to contact list instead. So going back to our code, when I do the post request, for now, right, I'm just going to kill this split for a second. And I just want to see the controllers. Okay, so this is just the controllers now. If I go to my post request for my process my login page, then instead of doing this, res render, whatever, I can just res redirect like we've done before. Res.redirect, and I want to redirect to the /contact list page. That's what it would look like if I was going to just do what I'm doing right now. So if I went back and if I went to log out and I went back to log in, then if I go admin and click login, now I'm back to what I had before. Same kind of functionality and stuff that I had issued in the past. Nothing has changed. But we've restructured properly. So now I have a model view controller structure for my system. So this is the right way, separation of concerns, decoupling, a decoupling pattern that allows me to optimize some of the stuff that I have. I'm decoupling my logic from my my router. So you can see the router is really, really straightforward now, right? I have router.get and I have router.post, and I have some extra stuff down in here, which I'm going to do this. This is going to be updated. This is not temporary anymore. This is going to stay. So this is gone, right? And we can put this up on GitHub. So again, I modified these changes, and I'll say restructured app to MVC pattern. Okay. So push. Again, all of this is in support of your lab 4, which is due next week on Friday. That's what I'm doing here for you. I'm supporting you. I'm giving you all the information you need to be successful in your lab. Almost exactly what you need. All right, so this is good. We're going to do one more thing, and then we'll stop for the day. All right. So now that we've established our routes, we don't have to touch those anymore. What I want to work on is my controller. I do have a config issue. Let's see where it says in my configuration. Whenever it lights up red, I'm always wary. You know, sometimes what it is just connections, Typescript connections. If I click onto it, it goes away, right? But I'm wary on what it looks like, okay? And by the way, we haven't checked any of this online. None of this, we don't even know if it's going to work online. We only know that it's working locally, okay? Great. So now that we've rejigged everything, let's take a look at that controller. So this is our controller, and I want to work on our login page a little bit. Our login page. So when we display our login page, we definitely do this. But we want to think about this now for a second. What if I'm already logged in, right? Do I really want to display my login page at this point, right? So the answer is probably not. I probably want to redirect. If I'm already logged in, don't let me log in again. Push me back out, to another, back to the, home page or my contact list or whatever. I'm already logged in. Don't do that again, kind of thing, right? So what I can do is when I'm starting to display pages, I can do things in a little, kind of a little bit better. So how does this work? Well, here's my display login. I can look for a user object. I can say, hey, if not request.user. Notice that user is actually an object that exists on the express request. Express request user, that has a user object. This user object exists, right? That's what this is. So type express user, right? So request user, if I did this, that's okay. If not express user, then I want to register. I want to go and show the login page, right? If it doesn't exist, if the user does not exist, as an example, right now, I want to, I want you to do this, to show me the login page. However, if it does exist, don't show me the login page. No. I want you to res.redirect to /contact list, because I'm already logged in. Go back to the contact list. That's what I'm looking at. That's why I'm logged in the first place, right? You can also redirect them to home or wherever else you want, but that's the way it's going to look. So worst case scenario, this is good. Now notice that I have a return statement here, and I didn't have a return statement before, so I have to remove that .void for a second. So if I save it and go back out to display login, it says return void anyway. So return, even though there's a return statement and I have this thing that I'm returning a response, right? That's what I'm doing. If I put response in there, right, it doesn't quite compute. Even though I want to return a response, the response type that I'm returning, so if I do this as an example, it says that it returns void, actually, right? If you notice up here. And it's kind of returning nothing. This returns a response, but the redirect doesn't do anything. It doesn't return anything. So actually, I'm really returning void. I'm just pointing this out just in case you're like, wait, he's using a return, but we're still returning. We're saying that the function returns void. It does return void. All right, next. So display login. Same thing with register. Why am I going to register if I'm already got a user? Don't let me register again if I'm already logged in. I should only be able to register when I'm logged out, right? So again, if not request user, if it doesn't exist, then and only then should you be allowed to register. Otherwise, it's probably a mistake. Maybe it clicked on there by accident. Let's go take us back to the contact list. Okay, that's res redirect. Other systems use other methods. They say things like, I'm logging you out. You want to register on your user, you need to log out of the current user. So that's something that they also do. All right, so that's something we can add in. All right, now the process login page. Let's work on this and then we'll stop for the day. So how does this really look? Okay, how does this really look? It doesn't look like this. This is just, a mock-up, remember? So let's take a look and see how this looks. First of all, we also have to do some changes to our login.ejs template. Okay, we need to do that too. But for now, let's one thing at a time. I'm going to do a passport. I'm say, hey, passport, I want to authenticate. Let's do that right away. I want to authenticate using the local strategy. That's the authentication strategy I'm going to use. Notice that the strategy string comes up. I would have liked to see here a strategy enumeration, but by default, JavaScript doesn't have a Typescript enumeration. I could certainly add the enumeration in myself and replace local, the string, with a strategy enumeration string, which may make it easier for me. Sometimes if you type the wrong string inside here, it'll completely not work. Like with just one character. If you made this capital L local instead of local L local, it's like lowercase, it's just not going to work. And then you're going to be really frustrated. So I want to have error, user, and info. Those are the three inputs I want for parameters. And I'm going to use a fat arrow function for this one. Starting off, I'm going to say something that looks like this. I want to check to see, are there server errors? Okay. If there are server errors, then I want to say if error. So if there's an error, if that exists, then what I want to do is I want to console error that error. I want to output that error to the console. And then I want to return the next error. So what this does is it's going to just go and output the error and stop operation. Okay. What about if there are login errors? Like, sure, we don't have an error, but somehow our user doesn't exist. So, we don't have a user that we got back. remember that whenever we do passport.authenticate, it's going to take the post function is going to pass in the request, response, and next object. The request object is going to have two things. What? Username and password. That's what the request object is going to have built in. It's looking for a lowercase username. And then if I have a username and password that matches the information I have in my database, then I'm going to be able to authenticate. Okay, that's how the login process works. So what if I don't get a user that's being stored here? If I don't get a user that's being stored here, right? And where do these user and info and error come from? We'll see this in a second. If I don't get a user, that means that somehow there's a login error. So let's put up a request flash. Remember, we're using request flash for the first time. I'm going to create a new request flash. Notice it says a key and a string, key value pairs. So the key is going to be the login message. That's going to be the login message I'm going to use. I'm going to also say that this is an authentication error. We don't know what it is, but there is some kind of login or authentication error. I'm not going to specify what type of error. I could say this is your wrong password. We can actually get information to figure out what the problem is. Okay. So request flash, we're going to do that, and then we're going to return res redirect, right, to the /login page. So this system request flash and return back to where we came from. If we redirect, we actually reload the login page, but we want to keep this message, this login message. We're going to pass this back out to the login page, which means in our login page, it needs another little bit of information, which you haven't given it yet, up here. Okay, we're going to give it to it later. Let's continue. So passport authenticate. This is the user. What if there's no user? If there is a user, then what I want to do is I want to finally produce a login. So when I want to say request, we're going to use the request object dot login, and the login takes the user, which is the express user that I passed in. So I'm passing in the user information that I'm getting from, kind of this user right here. Whatever the user is, after it passes through, I'm going to log you in, right? So if the user exists, if I get a user that exists in the database, I'm going to log you in. And so there's two parts. One part is Mongoose is going to check to see if the user exists. Does that user ID exist in the database? If it does, and if it matches the password, then I'm going to log you in. So I'm going to say login user. And if there's a problem, I'm also could possibly have an error, a different kind of error. And if there's an error, what kind of error could it be? Some kind of database error. So I'm going to grab this part. It's going to look identical, but it's going to be a different kind of error, right? Instead of it being a server error, it's going to be, are there database errors? Some kind of database error that might come up. Maybe the database is disconnected or something like that. Okay, so server, database, and login errors. Those three types of errors that can happen. If there are no database errors and everything is good, then I want to do this, res redirect contact list. Only then, and I want to do it in a return statement. Okay, the reason why we do it in a return is because then it hits up with the next function. So request, response, and next, the next function is something that we're returning out. What's the next thing we're going to do? All right. Now this is where it gets funky. The last thing we're going to do is we're going to self-call this function. We're going to say that I'm going to pass in the request, response, and next object as that's incoming from here, from the actual page itself, the process, right? I'm passing in these objects, request, response, and next, into the authenticate method, right? So this is the the thing that we're doing. Request, response, and next is passing into this. Okay, it's a little bit funky, but that's how it looks. And that, my friends, is the login function. One thing that we want to do, the last thing, so we've done that part, we want to support our Connect Flash, right? Like we said before. And what we want to do here is we want to do it slightly differently than what we've done before. Okay. And what this is the views have to be supportive of our, kind of the way things are done. So if I go into just to support this, I'm going to go into views, and I'm going to go into content, and I'm going to go into login. Later on, maybe what we'll do is we'll take this login view and put it inside of its own folder. Maybe we'll have an auth view, so I can kind of take them out of content views. It's not really a content view, it's something else, right? But for now, let's leave it where it is. All right, so at the top, we see that we have a class, row, and so on. And what I want to do instead for this view is I have a message area. I want to separate this message area out. Right now, the message area works on the client side, where if I have an error, whatever, it posts. I also do a form method is equal to post, so the post method actually works right now. But in the message area, I want to use some EJS. So the way is, here's the message area. By the way, we're going to copy this again and again. So we're going to do it for every form we have. We're going to have a little message area here. And the message area is going to use EJS. So we're going to say %if messages.length, right, is greater than 0. Only then are we even going to display the message area. All right, so that's something that we're going to do here. Okay. And what we want to say is inside of the messages area, right, it's going to be a div. We're going to pass that class in here, a div with a class of alert and alert-danger, right? Because we want to kind of pass that class in there. That's something that we want the div tag to have. And inside the div, we're actually going to inject the message, right? Whatever the messages are. So in order for me to do this, this requires me to have a messages object that I pass into the login page. I haven't done that right now. So if I come here, I'm going to have a big error. That's going to be a problem. So what does that look like from a controller perspective? Again, this is the last thing we're going to do, guys. Okay, just to show you what this is. So how this looks now when I display the login page, right? Whenever I display the login page, going back to the controller, then this is the process login page, but my display login page, which is up here, has to be extended. So what it looks like is I got a title and a page and a display name. These are all good things. But what I also need is a messages object. So we're going to say, and let's break this down over a couple of lines because it's a little messy. So I'm just going to do one of these. You can do this. It just makes it look a little bit better. I'm going to do this later for all of them. But basically what I'm going to say is that I have title, page, and display name, but also for the login page, I'm also going to have a messages object, which is a request.flash object that is, I'm looking at the key, which is my login message. So if I have a problem, it's going to be displayed inside of the messages object through that connect flash module. The other thing is that this part right here, I want to look at my request user. So I'm going to say, does the user exist? If it does, right, then what I want to do is I want to output the actual display name. That is what the display name is going to be. But where am I storing that display name right now? There is no place I can store it. But it can be part of the user object. I haven't done that right now. So right now, I'm just going to put it in. It's going to cause an error. We're going to fix next week or next day. Request.user. And I want to put the display name. Display name does not compute on request.user. We're going to add it in later. Otherwise, it's going to be empty. Don't worry about the error. It doesn't exist. The property display name does not exist, but we're going to make it exist later on. We're going to extend the user, the express.user, to include display name. Okay, so that is what our display login page now will look like. Okay, it has the information that needs so we can do everything properly. Notice that the messages is of type a string array. Why? Because request flash can have more than one message that I can have here, not just one message. All right, so if I save this now and let's try and go to the login page, it's going to cause an error. Don't worry about this error here for now. We're going to correct it tomorrow. Right, so I'm going to go back to here and log out. Okay, nice, nice, nice. One thing is, let's make sure we're logged out, because remember the logout page doesn't really work yet. So I'm going to go into inspect, application, and we still have a user. Let's just get rid of them manually, delete. Okay, there we are. And then when I log in, it's going to take me to my login page for the first time. And if I want to put in my admin user, remember there is no admin user. This is actually going to look at our database now. That's what it's going to do, right? Sorry, there's one more thing we need to modify. Oops, before we do this, we need to modify the view just a little bit more, right? So, sorry, before we do this, it's going to fail, but it's going to fail bad. What I want to do is inside of my login.ejs view, we have this as a, the form now is a post type method, okay? But down here, the button type is a button, not a submit. We want it to be a submit type, okay? We want it to be a submit type, because if it's a button type, right? If it's a button type, then it doesn't compute, does it? It doesn't compute. So that is an issue, okay? And also this part, this cancel button, there's two ways we can handle the cancel button. One, it cancels the login and stays on the page. Or two, it rebounds us back to our home page or something like that. I think we should just cancel the thinks we can have this as a reset button. And the reset button will just reset the form and it'll cancel the login. Okay, so that's what that will do. Okay, so that is a change we need to make on the login form. Okay, let's go back to this and refresh the page. We need to refresh and go admin, and then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. That was our page, and press login. And then, oh man, what happened? It didn't do anything and didn't even show our flash message. Well, it kind of did for a second. It kind of showed it and then it was gone. Okay, let's take a look and see where what happened on the command prompt. So back in here, control backtick. I want to look and see what happened. Well, I've got this error that came up. First of all, we had a login 500 error. A 500 error is a server error. It says, I don't know what you're trying to do here, Tom, but what you did does not compute. Of course it doesn't compute. We don't have a users collection at all. We've never made it before. So because we don't have a users collection, it's going to give me this funky error. I should have an error that comes up, right? That's what should happen, right? But I can't have an error when there's a, obviously it tells us there's an error here. But it tried to do the post request. Look, it tried to do it twice. There's one and then twice. So I went into that post request twice. Why? Well, let's look at the client side for a second. In our client side, and if I look at my scripts on the client side, if I look at my app.ts, well, what am I doing on the client side? So if I go down here, I go to my login form. When I go to login, it picks it up. Remember, we did this thing. I go to login, go to definition, right? Display login hides the message area. Oh, man. Right? That shouldn't be the case. The message area is already hidden, right? In fact, it does not exist. So this is going to be a bit of challenge later on when we do validation. But let's just get rid of it. So let's get rid of this piece. So we're not going to hide no message area anymore. Next thing is our login button. Our login button tries to add in a user into our data store, right? So we're going to check to see if our user exists in a database, and if it does, we're going to log us in. We don't want to do this anymore, right? None of this stuff. In fact, we just want to make this whole function completely empty. Even the cancel button that takes us back home We don't want this to happen. So we're just going to comment right now this entire function out. We may need it later on for validation, like a form validation thing, but for now, we're not doing anything like that. So let me just undo that change and comment it out. Sorry, I didn't mean to do that. Toggle block comment. And we're still going to go to logout, but I want to show the message. All right. And I don't want to do any kind of, login. Logout is there. It's going to eliminate the stuff, but logout, even that is going to be gone. All right. So register, same thing. So we're going to do some rejigging here on our back, on our front end. It's going to call it my back end because that's the first thing we did. So if I go back now and I refresh, and if I go into inspect, let's make sure that in my application, I don't have this user anymore. So let's get rid of him, delete. And then let's do a refresh and log in again. So I'll do a login, admin, and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And if I click login, we should get now this error. This is an example of Connect Flash right here. This is the thing I was talking about before, this authentication error that we're going to get. And even though we reloaded the page, it makes sense that this is happening. What's happening inside VS Code though? VS Code still has this really funky error, that says, you're trying to do a post request. Yes, Tom, excellent. But guess what? We're going to have a problem with our 500 page. We have a server error because we have no idea what you're trying to do. Okay? Because there isn't any user collection at all. All right, guys, so that is what I wanted to cover. Next day, what we're going to do is we're actually going to do the registration part. We're going to modify our registration view in order for us to do that. So our registration view is going to be changed. We should probably add that into a task that we have to do. So we've done a couple things here. We've restructured our application. We've kind of added in authentication configuration with Passport and Mongoose. So we've done these three things, right? Client server. We haven't done this. And what we need to also do is kind of update our register view, right? Because our register view needs to update with this thing. And we need to also, in our register view, we also have to make our register view work. So we need to, kind of wire up our registration. Wire up registration functionality. Because without registration, we don't have a user table. Without a user collection, then we can't log in. We need to do that. And we also have to wire up logout functionality. So log in, log out, all that kind of stuff. So those are the things we need to do in addition next day. All right, any questions before we go? I know there's some people that are online, as well as some people that are here in the class, Calvin and Muzda. Any questions from you guys before we go? Okay, if there's not, then thank you so much. I will see you guys tomorrow. And for some of the other people that are doing in section 6, I'll see you guys later on. Thank you so much, guys. I'm going to stop recording this, and I'll see you guys next class. Thanks, guys. Take care.